I would like to introduce a gentleman now who I first met up in Sacramento with a group of people from Monterey County, and when we heard him speak, we thought, well, we've got to get him down here. He's the director of the Population Dynamics Research Group at the University of Southern California. He is an expert in urban growth and change and an expert in societal change. And what I love about this guy more than anything else is he's an eternal optimist. Would you please join me in welcoming Dr. Dowell Myers.
Thank you, Ron. Well, I'm an optimist, but I'll tell you this, I'm already inspired by what I've heard this morning. There's a lot of great things happening in this county, and I'm very pleased to be here with you today. Our children are our most precious asset, and they are really the most important people on this planet. And yet we don't always make the most out of them that we could. You all are doing the right thing here. I'm going to be talking to you more broadly about big policy issues in California. What does it take to really make the children the centerpiece of the state? And it really begins with something called the social contract. You've heard that term used many times, I'm sure, and never defined. This is a definition I found by a sociologist, not a political philosopher, not Rousseau or somebody from France in the 18th century, but a modern sociologist. And it's a very interesting way of framing the social contract. It's about our shared social understandings that support our cooperation among self-interested people, i.e. voters, taxpayers, who want to know what's in it for them. Why should they share their unequal resources with people who need it more? And the shared understanding is what I'm going to be addressing today. There is a lot happening right now. My model for how to understand all this is the most simple model in the world. It works in every culture and society on the planet. It's the basic idea of being a demographer. I always, my standard joke line is that demographers are much smarter than economists. There's no economists in the audience today, I hope. Economists are really important, but they can't predict anything. They can't tell you interest rates 3 months ahead of time. They can't do anything. But demographers know that in 10 years' time, everybody will be 10 years older. Our politicians have forgotten that fact. We make decisions like the kids are a separate interest group, and that seniors are a separate interest group, and the voters and taxpayers are all separate. But when you animate them over time, guess what? People grow up. Those young kids become the new workers and taxpayers and home buyers, and they then become middle-aged, and then seniors get to advance to their entitlements that they deserve. And so we're all in it together here through a cycle of roles, but at one moment in time, people are frozen in place and different. I think that's at the heart of the disconnect that goes on. We have to look at those children for all the valuable things that they can contribute. As a demographer, I'm going to speak to you today about demographic change in California and the major changes that have occurred in the last 5 years and all the forecasts for the state. And I'll bring in Monterey County as well in that story. It turns out, in my assessments as an urban planner and demographer, that the demographic assumptions are really core to all the policy making. We don't talk about it a whole lot, but there's issues about race and about immigration and about age groups and who deserves what. And underneath that are these major assumptions, all of which have changed in the last 5 years. And I will show you how they've changed. Just in a quick summary to begin with here, most policymaking in California is based on pretty old ideas inherited from 1990 or before. Ideas like growth is booming out of control, we have to guard against it. Immigration is rapidly rising, it's a runaway freight train, we have to stop it. There's high fertility, way too many kids, we can't afford them. And growth is coming from outside the state, we have to put up barriers and stop people from coming in and guard our precious resources from those who would take it. That's an attitude from 1990 when growth was booming and people were coming from out of state. But really everything has changed since looking forward now from today. The new forecasts call for a slower, much more steady increase in population. Immigration has really tailed off in ways that none of us fully appreciate. Fertility has declined, and we actually have a shortage of children in California. We are actually losing kids, and growth is no longer coming from outside. Growth is now from native Californians. It's a homegrown population for which we are fully responsible. In trying to summarize the changes that have occurred, I came up with a list of about 10, which I boiled down to 4 major transformations that are underway, each of which is revolutionary. And I put them on the screen here for you to look at. I'll spend the most time on the generation transformation, but these others are really important too because they do serve as a background consideration. So first, on the lower future population growth, how low is that? Well, here's how much growth we had each decade prior to 2010. California had one whopper decade in the 1980s with 6 million people were added in one decade. It's a record never experienced in the U.S. by any other state. It won't be experienced again. Well, how would you forecast future growth? The state of California in 2007 issued their projections. Here's what their future growth expectation was. That we would sort of go back closer to 1980s and we would have this booming period of sustained growth. Then the census came in. The census results were 2 million lower than expected. And so they revised the forecast, as did myself and my partner John Pitkin. And the new forecast for growth looked like that, about 2/3 as much, which means, what does that mean? 2/3 as much growth means that we don't have to be so worried about outrunning our infrastructure. We have less emphasis on quantity, maybe more emphasis on quality for the people who are already here. It changes the balance of decision making. In terms of total population, here's the trajectory that was expected, and then below it, the new trajectory. And this means that California is going to hit 50 million people a lot slower than expected. It used to be we thought we'd hit 50 million by 2032, and now it's 17 years later. This buys us a lot more time to actually plan, get things right, and cultivate the population that we have already. We're not running to catch up as much as before. Monterey County also has slowed down. It's slowed down from hitting 500,000 in 2024 to now expectations are 2036. So a 12-year slowdown in Monterey. Immigration has turned around in the last 2 decades. Here's the acceleration of immigration in the U.S. from 1970. The number of annual arrivals just took off in the U.S., especially after 1990, reached a peak and has turned downward. This downward turn occurred before the recession set in. It was already downward by 2006. Here's what happened in California. Acceleration earlier, peak earlier, downturn. I come from LA County, so we're looking at this. It's a major downturn. And in terms of total foreign-born population, which people were extrapolating, a lot of the reactions people have politically to demographic change, you understand, are expectations that they extrapolate and they go, oh my gosh, at this rate, we'll all be foreign-born. Not going to happen. I mean, I was already born. I was born in Florida. So basically, it's leveled off now, and we think it's at a steady state. Immigration is just off the table in California. There's no change. It's a steady state, not an issue, and you don't hear any uproar about immigration in California. It's all coming from other states like South Carolina, where they added just a teeny little few immigrants, and they all went crazy because it was a big change. California is way beyond that. We're now looking at generations and how to cultivate and get the most out of the generations that we have. So this outlook on immigration has reversed, and the key idea is it's stable and constant. The generation transformation is what really interests us most today. So many of these children are the children of immigrants or the grandchildren of immigrants. The birth rate, the number of babies born, had been escalating dramatically in California and Monterey and LA County, all the counties of the state. It escalated dramatically to a peak in 1990 and then dropped down. Why did it peak in 1990? That's when the baby boom generation sort of ended its childbearing years. That's when immigration also turned downwards, so you had fewer immigrant parents. Birth rates also started to decline per capita after that point. It really raised havoc with all the school systems in the state, because the school planners started thinking, my gosh, at this rate, we have to build X number of schools per year. Well, it's now a more steady state, and that means it's possible in terms of providing enough seats for students. We can catch up in LA County, where we were way behind. But we still have to deliver higher quality programs within those schools. The population age shift is dramatic. The way I like to characterize this is what was going on the last 20 years, which people think is sort of the normal situation, last 20 years, and what's going to happen the next 20 years. In this top graph for Monterey County, I painted green the baby boomer cohorts, and they were all in middle age. The growth was in the middle ages, which are people who had the highest earnings, the most wealth in that age bracket. And then the next 20 years, the State Department of Finance projects that this growth will shift over age 65. It's not rocket science. They're 20 years older in 20 years' time. The millennials are coming behind. I painted them red. They're not nearly as big a surge in growth. But you see that Monterey County does do better than the state. It does manage to keep adding children, but not at a very high rate, not nearly as high a rate as they're adding seniors. Now, this senior ratio is a big deal. It didn't used to be a big deal, but it's dominating all the politics in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento. The ratio is the number of people 65 and older divided by those who are working age. And it wasn't a big deal because it was constant. In the U.S., it's about 24 seniors per 100. In California, it's about 20 or 21 seniors per 100, and it was constant for 40 years. Anything that's constant is like the sky is blue. It's invisible. I mean, take it for granted. Nobody notices it. Nobody talks about it. It's not an issue. We have no plan for this. We've never dealt with it. Do you want to see the next 20 years? So suddenly, baby boomers cross age 65. They load up the ranks of the seniors, and the shortage of children doesn't help the working age grow very much. And I think in total in the U.S. there's going to be like 17% growth in working age and 100% growth in seniors in the U.S. So the ratio then skyrockets. Monterey is not quite as bad as the rest of the state of California. It rises a lot here, but not as bad as elsewhere. You should see Orange County, where I was yesterday. I mean, the ratio goes up almost, well, I won't say twice as much, but it goes up a third more than this one here. So here's this picture here of a shifting population. One of the key questions is going to be, what does this all mean? So it's a trigger of all these crises in Washington. You've heard about all these problems here: Medicare, Social Security. There's a retirees, makes a workforce replacement crisis. How are we going to replace all these experienced baby boomers? There's a deficit crisis because we have to fund all these programs for everybody. And there's a home seller crisis, which I'll come back to this. So it's an interesting contest going on, and then the outcomes that are going to occur, some people say it's just a conflict between old and young. Because older growing and older people vote, and older people are going to get the big pieces of budget, and there's less and less left over for the children because there's fewer children anyway, so we can spend less and less on children. That's what some people say. Others of us are saying, well, no, actually this is the basis for a new partnership with mutual benefits between seniors and children. Something that really even we can show some mutual love, but really, we need to all work together is the bottom line to solve our biggest problems. And there are solutions, but it requires that everybody get on the same page, think ahead, and just imagine that we're going to all get 10 years older. And as you play that out, how will that work out? So the likely responses right now to this rising senior ratio are the following. And these are actually all happening already. Because of more of an older population, less working age, it reduces the GDP growth. All the economists say that. There's delayed retirement also going on for seniors, and that's been accelerating since. Actually, delayed retirement began by 1990 and has been continuing since then. We also have reduced benefits and delayed benefits for seniors. We have higher taxes on old and young. All these things are happening. What else is happening is that this puts young people in supreme demand more than ever because they are so vitally needed. And there's going to be greater reliance also on immigration to supply some of our growing needs because of the retirements that are coming. But there's one more factor that I think is really the least appreciated, and I think gives me the greatest optimism why I think we're going to actually have a major social policy change in this state and in this nation, despite all the politics you hear about. And that is, we are going to be rediscovering our neglected minority youth. And I say that not because we should rediscover them, which we should. We should have done that a long time ago. There should never have been neglect. But because we have this shortage now. And the greatest opportunity we have for closing that gap is by cultivating those who have been neglected most in the past. We need to raise everybody up to a higher level of achievement for the benefit of all. So no youth can be neglected. There's no dropouts can be allowed ever again, not with this shortage. And we certainly need to advance literacy among the youngest at the earliest ages possible, and certainly by grade 3. And I say that not because it's good for the kids, because the seniors need it to happen. So there's a whole reversal of outlooks here. What used to be high fertility is now actually really reduced fertility. What used to be too many children, too expensive, is now a shortage of children that is growing. And we used to have very few elderly. Now we have this baby boomers tsunami that is threatening to swamp everybody. And I just tell you, I agree with Mrs. Panetta. I don't quite believe it either. Even though I know the facts are true as a demographer and I'm a baby boomer, I'm not going there. Now, one of the other, the fourth revolution here that's really fascinating is the homegrown revolution. This is the land of the gold rush here. California has always had people come from all over the world to visit us and to be settled here. And it was only just in the last decade that we crossed a major threshold where for the first time the majority of California residents were native Californian. For the first time we became a majority homegrown state. I have some data here from 1980 to 2010. The gray line is for California, and I graphed in, these are Southern California counties on this graph. I'll show you Monterey in a second. And I'm proud to say that Los Angeles County, I predicted it last spring, and this fall, Los Angeles County also crossed the 50% line. We were the slowest in Southern California. And here's Monterey. Monterey just crossed over, it's not clear, sometime after 2000. We don't have data for the in-between points. But Monterey is also now majority homegrown. What does that mean to be homegrown? What is the political significance of that? Well, the old idea was that people were coming from outside, growth from outside. They weren't us, they weren't ours, we weren't responsible, and we didn't want it. But when it's homegrown, it is us, it is ours, we are responsible. And what it means for the future, and I'll show you some more data in a minute, is that our workers in the future will be people who live their entire lives in California. And their entire productivity will depend on California schooling. Not somebody who came here from Florida like me, or someone from Iowa or Texas or Taiwan or Mexico, but really people raised up in our state. And those are the people we are responsible for. Here's a projection for 2030 for California as a whole by age group, and you see that the homegrown percentage is really high among children. And it's even above 50% at age 35, 44. Those are the young workers. And this is not the way it was before. This is the new pattern. which is going to really put greater emphasis than ever before on what we do for our own kids. The senior ratio, again, is the key. And let me just convert this now to what does it mean for kids. I figured out an index. I have different names for it, but it's the index of children's critical importance, because we're so dependent on them. A kid born today is going to assume the weight of the world when they reach age 25. And that weight can be indicated roughly by the senior ratio increase. They're going to have that many extra people to support when they are taxpayers, when they are workers. And with the growth in the seniors, that ratio rises so much that it basically doubles the importance of children in California. So here's the index for Monterey County. All children were equally important through 1985, and after that point, people born after 85 became increasingly valuable to this economy, to the society each year, so that by those who were born in 2010, they're 80% more critically important, 80% more worthy of our investment. In fact, rather than spend less on kids because there's fewer of them, it seems in this case we should spend more on kids because there's fewer of them. Each child has to be per capita more productive, more skilled. So we owe it to ourselves to help kids be the best they can be, so they can help us the most. And this index shows you how it's not like before. This is why I take to Sacramento. It's not like before. This is like now and tomorrow. Kids are twice as important. We should double down our investment on kids. So we're now reliant on our homegrown, reliant for them for many things. And one thing I will point out is this. I published an op-ed in Sacramento Bee a year ago, and they did this wonderful graphic. I keep loving to use it. It's the California dream. Here are these houses, this subdivision of houses floating in the sky. These people up there are sitting pretty, these homeowners. But our children, our youth, my children, struggling to climb the ladder and can't get there. And we worry about this. It's too bad about those children. Too bad that they can't make it. But actually, if they don't make it, the older folks aren't selling their houses. Or they're not going to sell their houses for the price they thought they were going to sell them for, because the rescue is not going to come from outside. The homegrown population means we are cultivating our future home buyers. And the ones who are better educated pay a lot more for housing. I know exactly how much, 64% more on average. So I know who I want to have come knocking on my door when I want to sell my house. I want to be the kid I really nurtured from the cradle, the kid that I really invested in when they were going to high school, and I really helped them go to college, because they're going to bail me out when I want to cash in my nest egg. So the generations are connected at the most primal level of what's in it for me. And I think there's a lot there. We invest taxes up front, we get benefits back, lots of different ways. But the home buying one is a connection that is not widely recognized, and I think it's one that we should add to the repertoire, along with Social Security and Medicare and home selling and who's going to buy your house. It's going to be some kid who's in second grade today. So we're all in this together. It comes back to this life cycle, which is the most basic thing, and I don't know how it's disappeared from our political leadership's eyes. But this is how it works. People grow up. And the more you cultivate in the younger generation, the better workers they are, the better taxpayers they are, and the more they can pay for your house. And hopefully, if we help them to be the best they can be, they will be happier and live more fulfilling lives for themselves. But we owe it to the younger generation to help them, help us, and so that we can have our retirement too. So I have some publications that are referenced in the presentation. I just put them in the PowerPoint. You guys can see this later. So let's come to the conclusions, because I'm not sure exactly which is the right conclusion. They're all true, but you tell me. So what's the most surprising finding, do you think, about the new generational future for California? Is it the leveling off of the foreign-born? That immigration is no longer soaring the way it was? Or is it the new majority that's now homegrown for the first time? Is that the most surprising? Or it's probably not the explosion of seniors. You knew that was coming. That can't be surprising. Or maybe it's the scarcity of children and their newfound importance more than before. Is that what's most important? Most surprising? I think it's something else. I think it's more general. I think it's the realization that maybe we might be connected to each other after all. That's the greatest realization, the most surprising fact many people tell me. But you be the judge. Thank you. I have time for a couple minutes of questions. If you have any, I can address those. I know I answered everything already. Yes, question.
How do policymakers respond to this kind of data?
Yeah. Thank you. So the question is, how do policymakers respond to these kind of data? Many of them respond with just really a thank you, because it helps them to speak to their voters. Because politics is about what's in it for me. And so by my reframing the needs of children as what's in it for seniors, who are a large chunk, the majority really of the voters, people over 50. And 80% of the voters are homeowners also, by the way. So that seems to make it easier for the politicians, but they don't know what to do specifically. They're still looking for programs to be put forward and policies that you all are developing, but it increases the willingness of the elected officials to get behind the proposals, because now they have an argument they can give back to voters who are pushing back on them. That's what they say. Another question. Yes?
When you factor your child-to-senior ratios, do you factor in the children that are, the people that will be non-productive? Or, with our growing crime and our growing prison population, do you factor in the non-productive to the child-to-senior ratio?
I just take the total population numbers. I don't try to sort out who's more productive and who's less productive. I think that what's implied there, though, is that we really can't tolerate the neglect and the lack of productivity. I mean, the dropout things are astounds me the most. How can you waste so many kids? You can only do that when you have a surplus of kids. And believe me, we did have a surplus. That's me and the baby boom generation. We swamped everybody. And I think that's where the culture of neglect started. We let people drop out and live on communes in Oregon. We let them fight in wars. We parked them on college campuses. We had too many people. And we neglected people. No longer the case. Not possible. So I don't factor it in, but it is part of the solution, is to eliminate that non-productivity. I also don't factor in delayed retirement, which is also another solution that's happening already. I mean, people are retiring more slowly, and that's going to help. And immigration helps. So yeah, even with immigration, I testified in Congress. I had a great opportunity to actually testify at Ellis Island before Congress. It was really wonderful. And there I told them that immigration could help address this senior ratio, but it would only solve a quarter of the problem. Immigration by itself is not enough. You have to do all these things. It's a whole package of solutions, and I think it's bigger than most politicians want to bite off. And they also have a problem, like the electeds do, and they can't stop aging. And since they can't cure aging, they don't want to talk about it. They don't like to talk about problems they don't have a solution for in their pocket. So all those things I just sort of don't, the senior ratio is just taking the data over time, and we can look at how to soften it and make it work. But those are just the raw numbers. All right, well, I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much.